See, this one is dated June 2013. See right up at the top there, by the emergency manager. Hire an engineering firm to get the town ready for using, quote, the Flint River as a primary drinking water source. At the time, the state-appointed one-man government for Flint, Michigan, the state-appointed emergency manager was trying to carry out a plan that the city council had voted for back in the day, which was to try to save money by having Flint no water buy its drinking water from Detroit. They'd always bought water from Detroit, but it was expensive, and they decided that Flint was broke. They needed to save money, they needed to get a better deal for Flint, and so they wanted to use a new water system, be part of a new water system that was still under construction. In the meantime, while that new water system was still under construction, the city of Flint had a choice to make. They could make some sort of kind of short-term deal with Detroit, which the emergency manager said was really too expensive, or they could MacGyver some kind of solution for where they would get their water now that they were quitting Detroit, but the new system wasn't ready. They needed something to bridge between getting out of Detroit and getting into that new system. Flint's emergency manager decided not to try to work something out with Detroit, but instead they went with option B. They decided to MacGyver it. He signed that order, that June 2013 order, for Flint to get ready to use the Flint River as a primary drinking water source for at least a couple of years. A few months after that, April 2014, with Flint now being run by yet another emergency manager, Flint unhooked itself from Detroit's water and started drinking from the mighty, mighty Flint River. The following month, that new emergency manager in Flint decided to sell the pipe between Flint and Detroit. So if anything went wrong with this new MacGyvered solution of getting the water from the river, well, now there was no going back. The emergency manager sold off literally the pipe that would let them go back to Detroit water if for any reason they needed to. He basically sold the escape hatch, right? He sold the eject button. So Flint was committed to drinking from the river, this idea they'd come up with. The Detroit water, the water they used to be on, that was water from the Great Lakes. The water they were switching to was river water from the Flint River. And if you talk to people who know about this stuff, they will tell you that you do not switch from drinking lake water to drinking river water, as Flint did, without taking certain precautions. River water has a different chemical balance, which basically boils down to rivers being saltier than big lakes, and that makes river water more corrosive. So you have to take steps to keep river water from basically eating the old pipes, which are held together with lead soldering. If you let the untreated, corroded, salty river water eat the pipes, the lead leaches out of those pipes and gets into the water. And lead in the water makes people really, really sick. There's no level of lead in water that is considered safe. But if you take in way too much lead, it's rashes and skin lesions and hair loss and also permanent neurological damage, particularly if you're exposed as a kid. It can lead to lowered IQ, emotional problems, behavioral problems. The works. It's not that you should never use river water for drinking water. Plenty of places do. You just have to do this one thing. You just have to do it safely. You have to treat the water first so it doesn't corrode the pipes. We now know that the state of Michigan, the Snyder administration, told Flint it was okay to switch to that new water source without the anti-corrosion treatment. And so they did. They just made the switch. And first came reports that the new water smelled bad. It stung in the shower. In some homes, when you poured it in the tap, it came out rusty colored, or it came out looking like maybe it was light beer. Next came news that a local General Motors plant had a problem with the new water. It was corroding the engine parts built at that factory. GM started bringing in semi-trucks full of water to use at their plant. They knew they had to get Flint's terrible new water away from their car parts. Meanwhile, the state, the Rick Snyder administration, the state environmental agency started to get in test results showing that the level of lead in Flint water was rising. It had started at 6 parts per billion. Within 6 months, that had nearly doubled to 11 parts per billion. Around the same time, somebody leaked a copy of an EPA memo warning that some very, very high lead levels were showing up in Flint water samples. When that EPA memo started making headlines, the state of Michigan denounced the EPA worker who wrote it as a, quote, rogue employee. So the Snyder administration knows that lead levels are rising. That EPA report shows very high, very worrying lead levels in some samples from some Flint homes. The Rick Snyder administration at the time had an answer for an increasingly worried public who was looking at this stuff going on and starting to realize that there might really be a problem. And the Snyder administration's message to an increasingly worried public was, relax. Relax, people. Jeez.
Let me start here. Anyone who is concerned about lead in the drinking water in Flint can relax. There is no broad problem right now that we've seen with lead in the drinking water in Flint.
So that was the word from the Rick Snyder administration in July. Literally, relax. There's no broad problem that we have seen with lead in the drinking water in Flint. Turns out there was a broad problem with the drinking water in Flint. And the Snyder administration, so obviously not caring about it, spurred other people to action when they saw that the state did not care. A MacArthur Genius Award-winning drinking water expert drove 15 straight hours from Virginia Tech to start testing Flint's water. When he got the results, he went back to Flint and held a press conference on the lawn in front of City Hall to show Flint's water eating through an iron nail. He told the people of Flint, do not drink this water. A local doctor started studying blood samples from kids in Flint. Her results were scary and stunning. The proportion of kids with elevated lead in their blood was nearly double what it had been before the town switched its water source, just in a matter of a few months. In some neighborhoods, the danger had tripled, not doubled. The first guy, the professor, says the Snyder administration dismissed him as basically a huckster when he presented the results of his testing. The state described him as a magician who pulls the same rabbit out of a hat wherever he goes. The Flint doctor who tried to tell them that Flint kids were getting lead poisoning, the Snyder administration told people not to believe her. They said that doctor's results were spliced and diced. And in any case, the Snyder administration said those results were, quote, not related to the water supply. So relax, people. Drink your water. 6 glasses a day, they say. The Snyder administration held that line in public until finally they could not hold that line anymore. And then finally, after Flint kids had been drinking this poisonous water for 17 months. In late September, Governor Rick Snyder conceded that maybe, possibly, lead might be a problem in Flint, saying for the first time, quote, it appears that water lead levels could be higher or have increased since the town switched to river water. There are, quote, probably things that weren't fully understood when the switch was made. You think? You think maybe some things went a little cockeyed here? And now the kids who grew up in Flint are going to have to deal with it the rest of their lives, with points irreversibly shaved off their IQs and learning disabilities and behavioral problems, irreversibly for their whole lives. Do you think maybe somebody didn't think this thing through? It appears. On Monday, this week, the mayor of Flint, Michigan, just personally declared a state of emergency, a state of man-made emergency, she called it, in Flint. Basically just declaring herself as mayor, saying even now that the governor is acknowledging, finally, that what these emergency managers decided and what his state agencies did, now that he's acknowledging that that might be a problem here, the fixing of this problem is a matter that needs more help than anybody wants to count on Rick Snyder to be able to give. If you want to know where things stand now, reporters asked Governor Snyder again yesterday whether his administration is ready to help the kids who quite literally have been poisoned because of his administration in Flint. Watch this. This is just amazing.
Representative Dan Kildee is called saying, looking down the road, we're going to be needing more state resources and more federal resources to be able to help the children who might have been affected by this. Do you agree that the state will have to kick in some kind of money somewhere down the line?
Well, again, we've already made major contributions. Let's get the facts. Let's keep working this. And let's remember, water isn't the only source of lead, and so we need to make sure we're encouraging people to look at other places that could create a threat.
Let's make sure we encourage people to look at anything that is not the giant catastrophe that just happened on my watch in Flint, Michigan. Governor, the water of Flint, Michigan has been poisoned. And this isn't like, let me just say here for a second, I think the resistance to this being seen as a national story is because people think of lead as being like a long-term infrastructure problem, like, things went bad in that old city that needs work. This is like, if you want to make an analogy to personal health, this is not like something finally coming due after you've had, bad diet and no exercise for 20 years. This is the personal health equivalent of having been shot. This is not something that went bad over a long period of time. This is, they flipped a switch to turn off one spigot last April and turn on a different spigot. And the spigot they turned on poisoned the kids. The kids of Flint, Michigan have been poisoned by a policy decision. All at once. The town has been poisoned. Under your watch, Governor, through the actions and inactions of people who report to you and the people who you appointed. The emergency manager who signed that initial order to get ready for drinking from the river, he reported directly to Governor Snyder and to no one else. The emergency manager who sold the pipeline that should have been the escape hatch, he reported directly to Governor Snyder and no one else. The agency that did not tell Flint how to do this safely and that ignored the fast rising lead levels in Flint's water and that disparaged the first the EPA whistleblower and then the professor and then the local doctor who all tried to help, that agency reported to and continues to report only to Rick Snyder, the governor of Michigan. And now Governor Snyder is like, well, I guess we could try to do a little bit more to help you, but we've done a lot. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. How about a task force? How about I appoint someone with a lot of experience in PR, which Governor Snyder did this week as part of his response to this crisis. He appointed a brand new state-paid communications professional to handle this. This month in Lansing, a local pastor tried to get a petition approved for recalling Governor Snyder from office because of this man-made disaster. Look at this. This is the petition. Just look closely at it. It's a handwritten thing. Twice now he has tried with a handwritten petition to recall the governor for decisions made by him and his appointees and his administration related to this scandal. His petition has been rejected on technical grounds. For instance, Governor Snyder's private attorney argues that the recall petition is not timely because Flint switched to the river water that poisoned the town back in the governor's first term. And now it's the governor's second term, and so basically got to let those bygones be bygones. Can't recall him for that. According to Rick Snyder's lawyers, what's done is done. Settled. Nobody is accountable. Certainly nobody in the governor's office, and certainly not the governor. Mr. Snyder did manage to cobble together enough money to switch Flint back onto Detroit water for now, even though they sold the pipe. In Flint, though, remember what this problem is technically, right? Corrosion by that river water that came through, right? The pipes are still in Flint, all scoured out from the untreated river water. Who knows how long they're going to keep leaching lead? Is Flint habitable anymore? Really? Michigan made a decision with Rick Snyder a few years ago to do something very, very radical to the way we govern ourselves as Americans, something that nobody else has done. Now we're getting in the first results of what they have done. I did not expect those would have to be blood test results from kids, but that's what they are. That's what Rick Snyder did.